Hi, I'm Dr. Christy Cruz, founder and CEO of That's Right Consulting. I want to welcome you to Whose Line Is It Anyway? Citing Sources in Academic Writing. As I said, I am Dr. Christy Cruz, and one of the things that I do with, excuse me, with That's Right Consulting is I work with students who are completing their doctoral dissertations or master's theses. Most of my clients are completing their doctoral dissertations, and one of the biggest issues I see with students who are writing any research related document is struggle with citing sources, citations, the reference list. And so I created this workshop to help students and any professional or any academic who is engaging in scholarly writing with resources for citing academic sources in your writing. So that's what we're going to spend the next hour discussing is the reference list, citations within the text. What is the proper way to do that? And we're also going to discuss a little bit about the APA manual. And so my background is I have a Bachelor of Science degree, I have a Master of Science, and I have a PhD. My PhD is in higher education administration. And in addition to my academic background, I have authored a number of scholarly journals and papers, as well as some creative writing, but I've written a number of scholarly papers, articles, and I too have written a doctoral dissertation and a master's thesis. And as I said, my client base is students working on their doctoral dissertation. And so I have edited over, I want to say, but close to maybe 100 dissertations. So you can take me as an expert. This is something that I'm an expert in. So let's get started. Today, what we'll be discussing is we'll do an overview of APA. We'll talk about works credited in the text, and then we will wrap up with the reference list. So what is a citation? A citation is a way of crediting individuals for using their creative and intellectual property to support your research. It is necessary to use citations so that you can, one, avoid plagiarism, and two, help your reader be able to locate the sources that you've used. A citation style dictates how information used to support your research should be formatted. There are a number of citation styles. The three most common citation styles are APA, which is the American Psychological Association. Usually students who are or scholars who are in education, psychology, or the sciences use APA. MLA, Modern Language Association, is generally used by scholars and students in the humanities. And then Chicago style is used generally by those in business, history, and the fine arts. Today, we're going to talk about APA, the American Psychological Association, since my background is in education, the social sciences, and most of my clients are as well. So our focus today is on the APA. Currently, APA is still using the seventh edition, which was published 4 years ago in 2020. The purpose of APA is to guide you with how to format your paper, how to do in-text citations, mechanics of style, how to use bias-free language, the proper way to format tables and figures, the proper way to create a reference list. It guides grammar and the overall publication process. APA has a variety of resources that I want to touch base on here. So, four resources in particular. The first one is Mastering APA Style Student Workbook. It is an interactive workbook for teaching and learning APA. There's also the Concise Guide to APA Style, and this is for high school students and undergraduate students who are just learning APA, but it could also be beneficial for some people who are struggling with APA in general. Academic Writer supports students who have questions about the proper way to conduct research, how to structure research papers, and how to format what you write. The one that I was not as aware of, but I think is a great resource, is the APA style JARS. So JARS is the Journal Article Reporting Standards. These are designed for journal authors, reviewers, and editors. And the JARS is in three formats. There's a quantitative, a qualitative, and a mixed methods. So why do we cite sources? Again, citing sources is essential to give credit to individuals whose ideas and research have influenced your work, to assist the reader with finding the complete source of the information that is included in your work, and to avoid the academic consequences of plagiarism. Plagiarism, as defined in the APA manual, is the act of presenting the words, ideas, or images of another as your own. When that happens, it denies authors or creators of the content the credit they are due. So whether the plagiarism is deliberate or unintentional, it violates ethical standards in scholarship. You can also engage in self-plagiarism. Self-plagiarism is the presentation of your own previously published work as original. Like plagiarism, self-plagiarism is unethical. It deceives readers by making it appear that more information is available on the topic than really exists. And so it is important, if you have used your own work, or you have your own work, and you're writing a new paper, new journal article, new research, it is important that you also cite yourself in the work so that you don't leave or make the reader think that there's more research that exists on the topic than really does. Most institutions are going to have an institutional code of conduct. And this is just one from my previous institution, but the Institutional Student Code of Conduct generally talks about prohibited conduct, and that is all forms of student academic dishonesty, including but not limited to cheating, fabrication, facilitating academic dishonesty, and plagiarism. The university responds to those codes, violation of academic conduct. Usually each university is going to have its own procedures regarding student conduct that is going to take place in the student activities. You want to check your institution student code of conduct to be clear in terms of what the prohibited conduct is, how the university responds to those conducts, if there's warnings, do you have what options you have basically, and what sanctions are used for students who generally violate those codes. When I worked in student discipline, most often professors would give students the option of either taking an F on the assignment and staying in the course. Some professors may opt to give you an F in the course and have you retake the course. Again, that's institution specific, and most institutions leave that up to the faculty in terms of how they want to handle those instances of plagiarism. So let's jump into works credited in the text. So I've broken this up into the basics and the not so basics. So the basics, which are the things that you're generally going to see in text citations, can be found in the APA manual, pages 261 to 268, but we're going to cover those here. So the basics of in-text citations. In-text citations follow this guideline: the author and the date citation system. Very basic. In-text citations are either going to be parenthetical or narrative. And here are examples of how the parenthetical or the narrative citations generally look. For parenthetical, you're going to have the author name and the date in the parentheses. Narrative is usually going to be included in the text. You're going to cite the author's name and have the year in parentheses. So let's take a more in-depth look at parenthetical citations. So there's three ways that parenthetical citations work. The first is at the end of a sentence. So for example, things are not always as they seem. You're going to use that standard format, cruise, comma, 2022. When you are using parenthetical information within a sentence, you're still going to use that same format, but you're going to put it right after the area that, or the sentence or the phrase that requires the citation. So things are not always as they seem, citation, which is why you should ask questions. The last is that when you use the text and the citation and they appear together in parentheses. So in this case, this says, for example, things are not always as they seem, semicolon, cruise, comma, 2022. And so exactly how it is here, if you're going to do something in parenthetical in the parentheses that requires a citation, you would just include it all in there and divide it by a semicolon. The next is narrative citation. Narrative citation is pretty straightforward. There's two ways in which you can do that. The first is, again, the author's last name, the date would be in parentheses, and then you would continue with the sentence. You can also do it where you start with the date and then include the author's name and then go into the rest of the sentence. And that way you don't have to use parentheses in the in-text citation. So what happens when you need to cite multiple sources within a citation, an in-text citation? When you're citing multiple sources parenthetically, citation should be in alphabetical order and separated by semicolons. So example here, you have Cruz, which starts with C, Davis and Brown. Davis is the first author, so we go by the first author's the first author's last name, and then Martin. When you're citing two or more sources by the same author name, you want to arrange by year. You don't want to list the person's last name multiple times. So if you're using several articles by me, it would be Cruz, comma, 2004, 2015, 2022. Or if you're using it in terms of narrative, then it would be Cruz, the years, and then you would go on with the text. So APA is very clear about how you cite the number of authors within the text. If you have one author, here are examples of the parenthetical citation and the narrative citation. We've discussed that. If there's two authors, again, we've discussed the parenthetical and the narrative. So a change comes about when you have three or more authors. If you have three or more authors, then you want to use et al. Et al just means and others. So if it's parenthetical, it would be Martin et al, period after the all, comma, and the year. If it's narrative, Martin et al with the year. If you have a group author with an abbreviation, the first citation has to spell out the name of the abbreviation so that your readers know what organization, what group you are referring to. In this case, with a parenthetical citation, you want to do National Institute for Mental Health, brackets with the abbreviation, comma, and then the year. For narrative, you're going to spell it out in parentheses you do the abbreviation and the year. And then subsequent citations, you can then use the abbreviation. You don't have to spell it out. But the first time you use it, you have to spell it out. People get tripped up on this all the time because there are some organizations, there are a number of organizations that have the same abbreviations. And so it's not the responsibility of the reader to know what you're talking about. It's your responsibility to spell it out. And then if you have a group author that does not have an abbreviation, then you want to cite that group author or that group name or the organization name, just as you would with the author and the date. Okay, so then there are the not so basics of in-text citations, and these can be found in the APA manual, pages 258 through 261. So these are ones that come up quite a bit when I am editing clients' dissertations. And so I wanted to pay special attention or bring these to the attention of the writers. There are two types of sources. There are primary sources and there are secondary sources. Primary sources report original content, meaning that this is content that you found, that you read, and you are citing it. Secondary sources refer to content that was first reported in another source. So, for example, if I wrote an article and I included work cited from Bell, but you only read my article, the way that you would cite that would be Cruz, 2002, as cited in Bell 2014. Or I'm sorry, the other way around. If I wrote an article in 2002 and you didn't read my article, you read Bell 2014 and you didn't access my article, but you need to cite the article, but you only saw it in Bell, then you would do Cruz 2002 as cited in Bell 2014. A word of caution here: secondary sources and scholarly writing should be limited. It is your responsibility to find the primary source. There are going to be times when you absolutely just can't find the primary source online or anywhere. In those rare instances, yes, you still need to give credit to the original source. But citing secondary sources is frowned upon in academic writing. So this should be limited. Because what it says to the reader is that, in all honesty, that you're lazy and that you don't want to take the time to find the original source, especially when your paper is riddled with this type of stuff. It says to the reader that you're lazy. And if you have a lot of this in your paper and the reader thinks that, okay, you were just too lazy to find the original sources, it then starts to call into question you as a researcher, and then your paper, your dissertation, your theses in general. So the next is, how do you cite interviews? So you're going to have three types of interviews that you're going to be using in a dissertation or scholarly writing. The first is going to be published interviews, and these are when interviews are published in a magazine, a newspaper, a podcast. APA um, has sources or has formats for how to cite those. And so you just want to use the format for that particular reference. So you would look up magazine, you would look up newspaper, you would look up podcast, and you would use whatever the format is for that particular reference if it's a published interview. If you're doing personal interviews, these include that you have asked questions of someone via email, you did a phone conversation, a phone interview, or you have comments from them in text messages or via Zoom. Then there is a different format for that, and we'll discuss that next. The last one is if you've done research participant interviews, and these are usually interviews that are conducted as part of a methodology, and they do not require citation. They don't require citation since you are the first person reporting this information and it's going to be presented and discussed in the paper. And so there is no need for citations. But what about personal interviews, personal communications? APA says that personal communication, which includes personal interviews, since this work cannot be recovered, it is only cited within the text. It should not be included in your reference list. And again, there's two ways of citing personal interviews. There's narrative and there's parenthetical. If you're doing narrative, you would do the first initial, last name, personal communication, and the date. If you're doing parenthetical, you would include the entire format, the entire citation in there. So again, it's the first initial of the first name, the last name, and then personal communication and the date. And then depending on if you're using it in the narrative or in parentheses, this is how you would cite that. So we have seen a rise in ChatGPT and other AI models and software. And so while this was not included in the APA manual in 2020 when it was published because there was no ChatGPT or AI models, APA has since created a guide for that, and it is in the online manual, section 10.10 of the APA manual. And so in-text citations and references from ChatGPT and AI also have to be included in your paper. So number one, if it's used in your research, you have to describe how you use the tool in the method section or in a comparable section of your paper. If it's used in literature reviews or other types of essays or response or reaction papers, you have to describe how you use the tool in the introduction of your paper. If it's used in the text, you have to provide the prompt you use and then any portion of the relevant text that was generated in response. Okay, so let's look at some examples of how that looks. If you're citing and it's parenthetical, you would do OpenAI, again, the author, OpenAI, or whichever AI software you're using and the year. The narrative would be OpenAI, parentheses, and the year. So an example of how this would look in your document. When prompted with, is the left brain, right brain divide real or a metaphor? The ChatGPT generated text indicated that although the two brain hemispheres are somewhat specialized, the notation that people can be characterized as left brain or right brain is considered to be an oversimplification and a popular myth. And so you have to include the prompt that you used. You have to specifically state that the ChatGPT generated text indicated and include that. If you're going to do, you have to include directly quoted what you got from ChatGPT, and then you're gonna do a citation. It also must be included in the reference list. And again, here is the website where you can access examples, more detailed examples of how to cite ChatGPT. But I just wanted to give you a basic overview, but the APA online, APA style magazine or a book does have more detailed information and a variety of different options, but this is kind of your basic option here. Now let's take a look at the reference list. So again, with the reference list, There's your basics, and then there's your not so basics. The basics of the reference list are going to be found in the APA manual, pages 281 through 289 and 303 through 307. So let's discuss the reference list format and the order. The reference list is at the end of your paper. It begins on a new page. At the top of that page should have the word references. It should be centered in the middle of the page, and it should be in bold type. Reference list entries should be ordered alphabetically by author. You're going to double space the entire reference list. You're going to double space within the entries and between the entries. You want to apply a hanging indent of 0.5 inch to each entry. The first line of the reference is flush to the left, and subsequent lines are indented 0.5 inch from the left margin. This is a big thing for when I'm editing. I see this a lot where the reference list is not on a new page, or it's not formatted completely. It's not double spaced. The hanging indent is missing. Again, APA requires that this is how your reference list should be formatted and how you should alert the reader that this is the reference list. The elements of a reference, there's 4 elements of a reference. There is the author, the date, the title, and the source. So who is responsible for the work? When was the work published? What is the work called? And where can I retrieve this work? No matter what the situation is in terms of the author or if something is, this is how your format should look. So we're going to go over a couple of basic examples of how these elements show up in the reference list. So if you are creating a reference and there's missing information, APA provides a guide for you in order to do that. And that guide is on page 284 of the APA manual. So let's say your source that you found is missing an author. Then you want to just go to the next thing in line. You want to provide the title, the date, and then the source. If the date is missing, then you want to use N period, D period for no date. You put that in the parentheses, and then you move through title, source. Let's say the title is missing. You want to provide the author and the date, and then you want to describe the work in square brackets. And then you want to provide the source. Let's say there's no author or a date. You want to do the title. So the title just moves up in the sequence. You want to do N period, D period for no date. And then you want to include the source. So regardless of if information is missing, you still want to use the same format. Everything just moves up in how it's presented, or you include a placeholder, or you provide the reader with specific information as to, for example, why there's no date, or if there's no title to give a description. But you have to provide as many elements as you can to help the reader to be able to locate the source and to avoid plagiarism. So let's look at the reference list punctuation. This trips a lot of people up in writing. The purpose of the punctuation in a reference is to separate the information to make it more legible for the reader. A period is going to follow each of the 4 reference elements. There should be a period after the author, there should be a period after the date, there should be a period after the title, and there should be a period after the source. The only time you do not use a period after the source is following a DOI or a URL, because this could change the function of the link. Those are the only times when you do not include a period. Generally, a comma or parentheses will be used between parts of the same reference element. So for example, if you have multiple authors, you're going to use commas. If there are multiple sources, then you would use commas. So if you have multiple parts of the same reference, then usually a comma or parentheses are used, and I'll show you what that looks like. You're going to italicize punctuation marks that are italicized within a reference element. You do not italicize the punctuation between reference elements. So for example, if I am using a title or a source, depending on what type of source it is, and within what needs to be italicized, there is a comma, that comma needs to be italicized. However, if you are, for example, listing a journal, and then you do comma, and then you're going to do the volume, then that comma should not be italicized because it is between the elements of a reference. So let's take a look at how you want to format the author element in your reference list. Invert all individual authors' names using the surname first, followed by a comma, and initials for the first and middle name if the middle name is included. You want to use one space between initials. So here are some examples of that. Cruz, comma, space, C period, space, A period. You will use this format for up to 20 authors. So remember in the in-text citations, if it was 3 authors or more, you use et al. In your reference list, you have to list out every author up to the 20th author. When there are 21 or more authors, you want to include the first 19 authors, insert an ellipsis, no ampersand, an ellipsis, then add the final author's name. So let me say that again. For the first 20 authors, yes, you have to list out all 20 authors if they're included, if they're there. Follow this format of the inversion of the author's name. If there's 21 or more authors, when you get to the 19th author, ellipses, no ampersand, then add the final author's name. When citing 2 group authors, you do not use commas. For example, if you have 2 group authors for American Psychological Association and National Institutes of Health, you do not separate those by a comma. You will separate those with an ampersand. When the given or first name of an author is hyphenated, you must retain the hyphen unless the hyphenated name is lowercase. You must retain the hyphen in that reference list citation. And here's an example of how that looks. So if the first name is 2 capital letters, it's hyphenated, but there's 2 capital letters, then you would do the citation and include the hyphen. If the first name is lowercase, then or if the second part of the first name is lowercase, then you do not use the A. So in this example, Leanne, you would not use the A because it's a lowercase a, which means that that's just really considered one continuous name. You also want to retain the author's preferred capitalization in the reference list and in-text citation. For example, Bell Hooks does not capitalize her first or last name. And so you want to do Hooks, B period, just the way the author prefers it. Let's go back so you can take a look at that and have some time to ponder. Continuing with formatting the author element. What if your reference has a special roles like an editor? Then you would include that information in the citation as well. So you would want to put the last name first, last name, comma, first name, period, or initial of the first name, initial of the middle name, period, and ED. That is a capital E, small d, period, parentheses, period. And you would use the same format if you had multiple authors. One of the things that I want to point out too is with this example where you see Wong, CT, and Music K, with the even with two authors, you still have to use a comma and an ampersand to separate those authors. So where you see Wong, comma, CT, period, comma, ampersand, and then the second author. You would do that whether it's an editor or an author. You still need to separate with the comma, and you need to include the ampersand. If you have group authors, whether those are government agencies, associations, nonprofit organizations, businesses, hospitals, any group author, you want to always spell out the full name of the group in the reference list. The name should then be followed by a period. So in this example, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, that is the author name, and so you still would include a period. And then you would space, and then you would include parentheses and the date. If there are numerous layers of an agency that are listed, use the most specific agency as the author in the reference list. So if there is, let's say, under the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, you have the National Institute for Nursing Research, then you want to use the most specific of the agencies. And in this case, you wouldn't use both the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and National Institute of Nursing. You would just use the National Institute of Nursing. Now, if excluding the primary agency would be confusing, then you want to add both elements. So let's say Arizona State University, Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College. You don't want to just include Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College because that could be anywhere, right? That's not something that is specific enough that it would help the reader be able to locate that. So in this particular case, you want to put the primary and you want to put the specific agency just so that it's easier, it's easy for your reader to be able to locate that source. When you are formatting the author element and you come up with work that is anonymous, their APA is very specific in terms of how this must be handled. When there is no author or when the author cannot be reasonably determined, then you move the title of the work to the author position, followed by a period, then the year in parentheses. If and only if the work is assigned the title anonymous, should you list the author as anonymous. If the work is not signed anonymous, then you do not put anonymous because you can't find the author or you don't know who the author is. Only if they list that it's only if it's signed anonymous can you do this. Otherwise, move the title to the author position. So let's look at the not so basics of the reference list. The APA manual, you can follow along on page 305 and 306 for the not so basics. So what happens if you have the same author and same date? When you're citing multiple works from the same author with the same date, you want to use a lowercase letter after the year in the in-text citation and the reference list. So for example, let's say you have two works from Ezekwe and Bello. It's the same year. You want to let the reader know that there are two pieces that you're using from these authors within the same year, but they're two separate pieces. And so you're going to label one A, and you're going to label the other one B. So in text, it would be the authors, 2020A, and in the reference list, you would do the same thing. And then in text, you would label the other 2020B. I left out the zero, sorry, 2020B. And then you would do the same in the reference list. After alphabetizing by author name and using the year A and B, then you want to alphabetize by the title of the work, not using a, and the. So if it's a study based on, you would alphabetize by study. If it's the complete works of, you would alphabetize by complete. So you would disregard a, and the in the title when you're alphabetizing. So then you would go by title to alphabetize. Abbreviations and references. So there are a number of abbreviations that you're going to use in your reference list. These are the most common of those abbreviations. ED for edition, revised edition, second edition, editor or editors, if it's a work in translation, if there's a narrator or narrators, no date, the page, or if there's multiple pages, the paragraph, if you want to cite specifically the paragraph, the volumes or volumes, number, part, if it's a technical report, or if it's a supplement. And again, these are included in your APA manual for quick reference. So let's take a look at some common reference examples. The reference examples can be found in your APA manual, pages 313 through 352. And what I have included here are just common references, common reference examples from the reference list. So I'm not going to include all, but the ones that most likely are going to come up. So for example, with your journal article, this is a common one: journal article, online magazine article, print magazine article, newspapers. These are all common types of references. And so let's just take a look through these. So you see the inverted last name, first name, period, space, middle initial, period, space. In the first one, you see all of the authors are listed out. When you get to the next to last, you want to do that comma and that ampersand, the year. Then you want to do the title. And in the case where you have a journal article, the title is not going to be italicized. You're going to italicize the journal article. And then comma, and then the volume is going to be italicized, but not the issue in parentheses. And then you don't list PP, you just list the page numbers. And if this was found online and there's a DOI number, you want to include that at the end, but remember, no period at the end after the URL or the DOI. Same format with if you're using an online magazine article. Last name, so you have those 4 elements. The most important thing is to note that the 4 elements have to exist. You have to have the author's name, you have to have the date, you have to have the title, and you have to have the source, no matter what. And so in the case of something that's online, you're going to include the title, and then with the online magazine article and the online newspaper article, then you want to include the link. So as long as you're following that format in terms of including those 4 pieces, then you'll be fine. Blog post, a authored book, edited book chapter, same thing. You've got to include the author, the date, the title, and the source. With the edited book chapter, you see the EDS. You also have to include, with edited book chapters, you have to include the editor's name. And so after the title, you want to put period in the names of the authors. This time it's not inverted. For editors, it's not inverted when you are including a book chapter. And then you want to do the title. You're going to use PP, period, page numbers. Okay. So I know this is a lot. It's what I've done to help me is these that are the most common sources that you're going to use or that I see with my clients. I bookmark those um, in my spiral. I like the spiral APA manual. It's a little more money, but it's easy to maneuver because you can just lay it flat. And then I like to attach little color-coded tabs to the page so that I know where the different sections are. Here's one to pull out. There are going to be times when you might use someone else's dissertation from a database or a conference session. I just want to note where you see examples of how you would use square brackets. And so you can see that it's letting the reader know that it was a conference session. You want to put that in the brackets. And then again, with the example of the dissertation from the database, you want to include in brackets that it was a dissertation and which institution the dissertation was completed, at which institution it was completed. Here are more examples. Um, if you're going to use a data set, the information that needs to be included as part of that data set. A film or video is a common one. You want to make sure you include the directors. You want to put that they are the directors in parentheses, followed by the date, followed by the title of the film. You want to indicate in brackets that it is a film, who is the creator of the film, and then more specifically with this one, that is a Pixar Animation Studios. You can do the same thing with TV series, TV episodes, webinars. Again, I hope you can see the common thread throughout all of these. It's those 4 elements have to be included as much as you can, unless there's some missing information. YouTube videos are common now, and citations, songs, podcast episodes, infographics. So, example of how you would cite a YouTube video or a song. Again, you're just letting the reader know that it is a song, that it is a video, where you got it from, um, who the author is, creator of the art. More examples of those. I think one of the more common ones, like with the tweet, we have people who, depending on the type of research, they may use tweets in their sources. And so this is an example of how you would do that. You want to put their handle with the tweet in addition to the date. You want to put the date, the month, and the year with that. Web page information. One thing I do want to call your attention to, so if you know on Open Educational Resource, this particular one has the date that it was retrieved from. And you see that the other ones don't have that. So in this particular case, with an open educational resource, that resource could change or information could change in that resource. And so you're going to put retrieved and the date so that if something is added later, you're responsible for what was on that page or the source that you use on that page on that date. Right. So the other citations where you don't necessarily, where you're not putting retrieved and the date, it's because those are static, fixed documents. Those documents are not going to be changed or updated. In this particular case, with an open educational resource, that document could be updated or changed. And so you're going to put what the date that you retrieved it. Again, web page with a retrievable date. You're going to also include the date that it was retrieved from there. And again, you see that it's a coronavirus map. That is something that at that time could have changed, right? They were keeping tabs on how the coronavirus was moving across the country, across the world. And so depending on the date that you retrieve that map, that would have looked different because this was an ongoing epidemic during that time. Okay, so that is it for this presentation of references of works cited, whose line is it anyway, citing sources and academic writing. I hope that this information has been helpful to you. This presentation is going to be uploaded on my YouTube channel, and so you will have access to this moving forward. These are the references that I use: the American Psychological Association and Arizona State University Student Code of Conduct. And so if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Again, I'm Dr. Christy Cruz. I am the founder and CEO of That's Right Consulting. My email address is that's right consulting at gmail.com. My phone number, I can be reached at 618-806-2860. And this is my Wix site, my website, where you can find testimonials, you can find services offered and the cost of those services. We have two upcoming webinars on July 18th, To Quote or Not to Quote, The Art of Paraphrasing, which goes hand in hand with citing academic sources. And then the last one is July 25th, and that is How to Write a Literature Review. I often find that a lot of folks struggle with the difference between summarizing and synthesizing and writing a literature review. And so these workshops, these webinars are free. They will be recorded and they will be uploaded to my YouTube page. So if you would like to register for these, you can go to my website, ChristyAnnCruz.com. You want to click the upcoming events tab. It will take you to these events and you can register for them online. Again, they are free and they're an hour long. That concludes our presentation. I'm looking forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.